So, now that we're about 5 Sundays in, 4 or 5 in, I've come up for a name for this series that I've been doing. Amazing Jesus, that's what I'm calling it. My Amazing Jesus series, because we started off talking about how the people were amazed at his teaching. And then they were amazed at his power over demonic forces. And then they were amazed at his healing power. And then they were amazed last Sunday at his power over nature. Let's see what they're amazed at today. If you will stand with me, please. We are in Mark 5. Very familiar picture on the screen this morning of the girl touching his hem of his garment. We'll discuss that here just momentarily. So Jesus had been over on the other side of the lake of Sea of Galilee, and he dealt with the demon-possessed man. We're actually going to come back to that, but I'm kind of doing this in an order that I wanted to do. And so he gets in the boat and he goes back across the lake. Now this account is found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So we know that he's going back to Capernaum. This is where this all takes place. So Jesus gets into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was, and I've heard Jairus or Jairus. I've always grown up with Jairus. I'm going to kind of stick with that because I think I'll probably accidentally say it, even if I try to change it. So Jairus arrived, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. "My little daughter is dying," he said. "Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live." And Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, "If I can just touch his robe, I can be healed. I will be healed." Immediately, there's our word. John, how many times is it in there? 41 times. It's in the book of Mark. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, and so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter," that's the only time that term is ever used in the New Testament. It's him calling her daughter here. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." While he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. And they told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. And he went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead, she's only asleep." The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum." Now that's Aramaic. Mark records what he said in Aramaic. "Talitha cum," which means "little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. There's immediately. They were overwhelmed, and here it is, everybody, and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened, and then he told them to give her something to eat. God's people said, Amen. Amen. Please be seated. So he's concerned about her. Get her something to eat. You know, she probably hadn't eaten in a while. She'd been sick. She's on her deathbed. Jesus gets out of the boat, and Jairus sees him, and comes and falls on his knees. And worships him and begs him, please come heal my daughter. This is our proper approach to Jesus. We see him, we find him, and we fall on our knees in front of him, and we worship him. And Jairus did that. Why did Jairus think that Jesus, this itinerant preacher, why did he think that he would be able to heal his daughter? I mean, after all, Jairus is the church leader. He's the pastor of the local church. That's what he was. He was the synagogue ruler. So he was an administrator and pastor at the local Jewish church there in Capernaum. And yet he's on his knees begging this itinerant preacher. Well, let's remember what happened back in Mark chapter 1. Jesus stands in his teaching, and the people were totally amazed at his teaching. And then suddenly a man who was possessed by a demon calls out to Jesus and says, what do you want with us? You know, he recognized Jesus. Well, Jairus saw that. He knew the power that Jesus had because he had seen it in his own church. And he had also heard Jesus' amazing teaching. And so he knows that Jesus can heal his daughter. And he shows a tremendous amount of faith. He's the leader of the church, and he's on his knees in front of this preacher who's coming through. That shows desperation, doesn't it? You know, guys, when we're desperate for God, he's pretty much got us right where he wants us. Because that's when we're going to forget about everything else and we're going to focus in on him and get desperate. And so he asks, he says, come to my house. You know, there was a Roman centurion that said, you don't even have to come to my house. You know, you'd be unclean if you did. So you don't even have to show up. Just say the words. This is in John. You know, because Jesus is the master of distance. Remember we talked about that. So the centurion said, hey, just say the words, and my servant will be healed. The servant or his son? His son. Okay, his son. All right, and so it was the bald-headed guy in The Chosen, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. And so, yeah, I like that guy. All right, so he said, you don't even have to come to my house. But Jairus, I mean, he wants Jesus in his house. Come. Yeah, she's on her deathbed. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us how grim this was. Luke is basically saying, I mean, she was gone. And she's on her deathbed. Why they knew this, I'm not sure, but they knew that she was dying. And he's desperate. He sees Jesus, falls to his knees, says, please, come to my house. And Jesus said, let's go. So the whole entourage is moving through town. And then Mark does this interesting literary thing here. He gives us a sandwich story. We start with Jairus and his daughter, and we end with Jairus and his daughter. But sandwiched in between is this wonderful story of this woman. And you start studying the similarities between the woman and the daughter. The woman had this hemorrhage problem, this bleeding issue for 12 years. How old's the daughter? She's 12. And so as long as the little girl had been alive, this woman had been suffering. And you can make some other comparisons and contrast, and that's your homework assignment for this week. But it's just so interesting. And 12 is a biblical number. You know, it's an interesting number. It shows how long that this woman had been suffering, and she thinks, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, then I can be healed. And, you know, because we went through Malachi chapter 4 a couple of weeks back, we realize that this is a fulfillment of prophecy. Because Malachi 4 says that the Messiah would come with healing in his wings. But the wings in Hebrew can also be the hem of his garment. And so her touching the hem of his garment is a fulfillment of prophecy from Malachi 4. It's just amazing. It's just cool. Yeah, our faith is amazing. The Bible is amazing. Jesus is amazing. And this power that he has is amazing. And so this woman, now let's talk about her for a minute. That hemorrhage, that bleeding problem, and I heard a preacher say that they could have fixed her with a surgery. They just weren't ready for that back then. Matthew and Mark tell us that she'd spent all of her money on physicians. Luke kind of leaves that out. It's kind of interesting. The doctor didn't write that part, but exactly. And so it's kind of interesting. She'd spent all of her money. We've talked about her before. You guys know, you know what I'm about to say, that because she had this particular problem, that made her unclean in society. After an issue of blood, that makes a woman unclean for a week. And well, she's got a constant issue of blood, and so she's constantly unclean. She can't touch anybody. I mean, she's like a leper in a lot of ways. She would, if she walked up and grabbed Jesus, she would make him ceremonially unclean. This woman can't go to church because of this, because in the Jewish faith, she was unclean. This goes back to some laws back in Leviticus, which was a reminder to us that sin makes us unclean and the blood cleans us. I mean, there's lots of, the symbolism is there, and that's why it was there. But this made her unclean. Now, as she's pressing in the crowd, she's touching people. So she's really breaking the rules here. But again, she's desperate. We see that Jairus is desperate. She's just as desperate. She's like, this is my chance. Jesus is here. I'm going for broke. And she, think about this in her mind. It says what she was thinking. She didn't grab him by the hand. That would have made him unclean. But maybe just touching the hem of his garment. And you know, she was just going to do it in secret. She was just going to touch him, get healed, and Jesus was going to keep going, right? And that is absolutely one of my favorite scenes in The Chosen, when the woman touches Jesus and he feels the power come out of her. You know, I always thought, what would that feel like? You know, probably electrical, kind of an electric shock, you know, goes through him. And he felt the power come out of him. And he knew what she had done. And he said, who touched me? The disciples are like, Jesus, everybody's pressing in on you. And in the Greek, that's very powerful, how they're pressing in on him. And he's just having to work his way through this crowd to get to Jairus' house. And she works her way up there, and like the picture showed. And she touches the hem of his garment. She's immediately healed, and she could feel it. She knew. And Jesus could feel it too. And so he said, who touched me? Now, why did he call her out? There's a couple of reasons here. You know, he's showing her faith, and this is a good lesson, and you know, it's a fulfillment of the prophecy that he comes with healing in his wings from Malachi. All of these things, but there's something more than that, and we've discussed this. Because she was ceremoniously unclean, she couldn't go to church. She couldn't join society, but by calling her out in public that she had been healed, I mean, how else would she prove to everybody that she'd been healed? I mean, she'd maybe get her color back and maybe start to feeling better, and they could tell over time. But this immediately showed her town that she had been healed, and now she can go to church again. Now she can go back to the synagogue. Now she can touch people again. And so what he did for her was a tremendous favor that he called her out. Now she's trembling. She's feeling that amazement and that that fright that people always feel when we encounter the supernatural. We've talked about this in the past couple of weeks, because it's always frightening when we encounter the supernatural. And so she's frightened, and she's not sure if Jesus is going to scold her for making him ceremoniously unclean. But let me ask you something. Did she? No, he's not unclean. Because she's healed. It's an amazing story. And so he shows the whole town, this woman is healed. She's clean. She can go to church. She can touch you. And so, what a fantastic story. But it's sandwiched in between him going to Jairus' house and healing the daughter. And so he calls her out and he says, your faith, guys, there it is. How often do we see that? Your faith has made you well. That's what Jesus says several times. It's your faith that makes you well. Faith is God's delivery truck. That's how he gives us salvation. That's how he gives us healing. Anything else that we're praying for, it's by faith. Dr. Lisa was talking about Abraham this morning, and that it was his faith that made him righteous. And Paul said, that's what makes us Abraham's children, is our faith. That's the connection. And he calls her daughter here. It's a wonderful term. He's not going to call the little girl daughter, but he calls this woman daughter. She's a daughter of Abraham. She's Jewish. And it's a comforting term. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. And I heard MacArthur say that in the Greek, you can read into here that he's saying, you've been saved. You know, he says, your faith has saved you. This could be a salvation moment for her as well. Now remember, there could have been other things that were said that are not recorded. John said if everything was recorded, the world couldn't contain the book. And so we know that there are some things said here. So anyway, and we know from Mark chapter 2 that our main need is not a physical healing, it's a spiritual one. It's forgiveness. And so this is all at play here. We're seeing all this symbolism. We're seeing all these things. And he says your suffering's over. Man, that's just so good. You make the play. You say, there's Jesus. I'm going for it. I'm going to touch him. And he ends up, the last thing he says to you is your suffering is over. And so it's a wonderful piece of story here of this account. And so he keeps going. He's still speaking to her. He's still trying to get to Jairus' house. He's still speaking to her, and somebody walks up and says, tell the teacher not to bother. She's dead. That's what we say. As long as there's life, there's hope, But what we're seeing today is that even after this life is over, we still have hope. I've preached a lot of funerals, and I tell them, we have the hope. We don't have to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope, Paul says in Thessalonians. We have the hope of seeing each other again. Even if the person passes away, that's not the end of the story. That's why he said she's only asleep. That's what he meant by that. This is only temporary. We all sleep, and we all know that it's a temporary separation from reality. And so when he says she's only asleep, that's what he meant. But they come up and they say, tell the teacher not to bother. Tell Jesus to go do something else. Don't bother coming to the house because she's dead. It's over. He didn't make it in time. Maybe if he hadn't have stopped, to talk to this woman. Maybe he could have made it in time, but he didn't. You know, you can just kind of see the attitude here working. Tell the teacher not to bother. She's gone. It's over. Jesus said, let's see what he says. There's no use troubling the teacher. But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just have faith. Man, that's Jesus' word for me today. That's his word for you today. Don't be afraid. Just have faith. The stuff that we're going through, the stuff that we're facing, don't be afraid. Just have faith. Faith and fear are opposites of each other. We get afraid when something happens. But living in fear or living in faith are opposite of each other. Don't be afraid. Have faith. He just told that woman that faith had healed her. Now he's telling Jairus, you have faith too. And so then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let them go with him, except Peter, James, and John. Now this is the first time that we see the inner three. I thought it was interesting that Mark says John, the brother of James. There's kind of this little rivalry between Peter and John here, and I don't know if maybe that's what's coming out. It's kind of interesting that he identifies John, the brother of James. Of course, I know there's a lot of Johns. There's also a lot of James, and there's a lot of Marys, and there's a lot of Simons. But anyway, this is the first time that he takes these three. Now, just imagine if he had taken the whole town into this girl's room. It just wouldn't fit. They wouldn't fit. And so he only takes Peter, James, and John, and the mother and the dad. When they came to the house of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw, and he's reminding us again, this is not just some dude. He's the leader of the church. Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. I think Matthew or Luke 1 tells us that they were actually playing flutes. Now, this was a cultural thing. You were actually required by just the culture to hire at least one wailing person and two flutes, even the poorest of people. Now, Jairus was rich. He's a synagogue leader, and we know one of the reasons they hated Jesus, of course, he doesn't hate Jesus, but a lot of the Jews did. These synagogue leaders hated Jesus because they were rich, and he was threatening that. But anyway, so he would have had lots of flutes and lots of wailers. They would actually hire professional wailers. And the more noise, the better. Our funerals are quiet, and we kind of whisper to each other. But their funerals, they wanted a lot of noise and a lot of sound going on. It's just a cultural thing. And so while the commotion and weeping, the child isn't dead, she's only asleep. There's Jesus saying it to everybody. Well, they laughed at him. They're really upset, aren't they? Here they are laughing at Jesus. But he made them all leave. Now, that's a very forceful thing, that he made them leave. He kicked them out. This is a little reminiscent of him taking the ropes and overturning the chairs in the temple. He kicks them out. Now, it may be that he took Peter, James, and John in there with him, and then the other disciples were standing guard, or the other disciples were doing the physical pushing. But he pushed these people out. And then he goes in with the girl's father and mother and the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, into the room where the girl was lying. That tells you that Jairus had money, the fact that she's in a separate room. So she's in her own bedroom. She's lying in there. He takes her by the hand, very tender. That's the word I was trying to say a while ago when he called her daughter. I couldn't pull up that word. It's very tender of Jesus to call that woman daughter. Well, here, look how tender he is. He takes her hands. Takes her by the hand, and he holds her hand, and he says, Talitha cum. Made such an impact on Peter as he's telling this to Mark, that he recants it in the Aramaic, because just hearing Jesus's voice saying this, Talitha cum, is just a tender moment, which means, little girl, get up. And the girl who was 12, now here he tells us she's 12. He wants us to know that she's the same age as the woman's bleeding was. It was 12 years. He's also telling us that this little girl is on the cusp of life. She's coming into marrying age. She's 12. I mean, her life. She's at the edge. She's leaving childhood behind and moving into being a woman. And so Mark wants us to know right where she was, her station in life. And the girl who was 12 immediately, there's our word, stood up and walked around, and they were overwhelmed and totally amazed. So there's our series. Is how the people were amazed. So they were amazed at his teaching, of his power over demons, of his power over nature, of his healing. And today, I want to remind us that they were amazed because he could bring you back to life. Even if you died, he could bring you back to life. Well, that's the story of the gospel. He said in John 11, when Lazarus died, he said, everyone who lives and believes in me, even though they died, they will never die. Jesus has the power not only over nature and sickness and demons, he has the power over life. John 1 says, the life is the light of men. He's the light, and he's life. I'm the way and the truth and the life. He created the universe, and he's holding it together. If you're alive, it's Jesus that's giving you that life. It's Jesus that gave you life. It's Jesus that's keeping you alive. If you're still alive, he's got a job for you. He's got a purpose for you. He's still got something for us to do. And so he is life. And so Mark is building this case of how amazing Jesus is and was, and how amazed the people were at him. And today, he even has the power to give life back to someone who has lost it. He raises her from the dead. She was dead, and he brought her back to life. And everyone was totally overwhelmed and totally amazed. He gave them orders not to tell anyone what happened. He does this several times. Jesus had to control the crowds. Remember, there's another place where it says they were going to force him to overtake Rome and be a political Messiah. And another place in the Gospels tells us that Jesus told a man not to tell what he had done, but the man went and told everybody anyway. And it said after that, Jesus couldn't stay in the towns. He had to stay out in the desert places. And so it changed Jesus from being able to live in town and forced him out. And so he's telling them, don't tell. And then he looks at that little girl and he says, let's get her something to eat. I just love that that's the way this ends. He's concerned about every aspect. Brought her back to life and said, I bet she's hungry. Let's get her something to eat. Isn't that wonderful? Two stories together, sandwiched in. Jesus is amazing. His power is amazing. And stand with me. Let's do one more song. Father, I do thank you for this day, this time.